So I'd like to welcome everyone, and especially our special guest, Dr. Adrienne Scheck, and she's going to talk about GBM and the ketogenic diet today. So go ahead, and I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm going to mute myself because I'm actually in a public library. So I'll just let Dr. Scheck and Bratton take over. So thank you and welcome, and check out OurBrainBank. Check out our app if you haven't already. It's opened up right here. It's really great. You've used to track your symptoms and your treatments, and then researchers use the research. So take over, and thank you very much.
Okay. I know we're a small group. I'm generally pretty informal, so if you want to interrupt me, go ahead. You might have to wait for me to see that you're interrupting me. So I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you guys. So this is what I kind of plan to do. I plan, first of all, to make sure everybody knows, and I know it's being taped, so this kind of goes out to everybody. I am not a physician. I cannot, will not, and should not give any medical advice whatsoever. I'm also not a dietitian or a nutritionist. I'm probably not the best person to ask about the best way to implement the ketogenic diet. However, Bratton is pretty much an expert, and he really is doing awesomely with it, so he could probably answer those questions even better than I can. So I am a research scientist, so what I'm going to tell you is preclinical work. Preclinical means it's the stuff that happens before it officially goes into a clinic. So I'll give you a little bit of background, I'll give you some of our data to show you how it works and why, as a scientist, I think it's really good. Obviously, I want to answer all of your questions, and it's really important that everybody understands that there is no such thing as a stupid question. Any question is a good question. And sometimes the naive questions are the best because they make us think. So with that, I'm going to jump into it. And if there's something I say that you don't understand, or if I'm speaking too fast or something, because I have a habit of doing that, please just wave at the camera so I know to slow down or to stop and to explain things. So this whole metabolism and cancer thing kind of started with this guy named Otto Warburg. And it kind of started sort of in the early 1920s. What he came up with is that tumor cells, and don't worry about the big words, I'm going to kind of explain those. Tumor cells make energy from glucose in a really weird way. Normally what your body does is it takes in glucose or sugar, and it breaks it down and it makes boatloads of energy molecules if there's oxygen around. If there isn't oxygen around, it makes fewer energy molecules, but it makes more molecules that are used to make more cells. So your body has a couple of different ways of getting energy from glucose. So what cancer cells do is, even if there's air around, they actually use a different way of getting energy as if there wasn't air around. So what that means is they're not getting a whole lot of energy molecules from the glucose. And the bottom line of that is tumors need lots of glucose. They suck glucose in like crazy. And if any of you have had or heard about a PET scan, PET, it uses the fact that tumors need lots of glucose. So it actually looks for where spots in your body are using lots of glucose. So this was sort of the beginning of metabolism in cancer, or screwed up metabolism in cancer. But then everybody kind of started to ignore it because they started to look at what genes are involved. But this is the way we look at it. So some people think that cancer now is a metabolic disease because cancer cells have screwed up metabolism. Lots of people think cancer is a genetic disease because your genes in cancer cells are messed up. And now there's something called epigenetics, which I'll discuss later, and that's yet another thing that people think, well, that has to do with cancer. So you might go online and hear people say cancer is a metabolic disease, cancer is a genetic disease, and we think that's nonsense. This is the way we look at it. If you look at cancer and metabolism and epigenetics, you can't separate them. It's like a bunch of kittens playing with this stuff. So all of these things play off each other. So we think cancer is the perfect storm. It's got metabolic aspects, it's got genetic aspects, epigenetic aspects. So when it comes to treatment, it makes sense that you don't want to only look at one aspect of cancer. You really want to try to treat the whole thing, you know, the whole gestalt, all of these things together. So that's kind of where my lab has been, is looking at this from that point of view. Okay, so like I said, this guy Otto Warburg had the Warburg hypothesis, which talks about how glucose is used. Don't worry about the big words. Basically, the tumor cells are using the sugar in a way that lets them make more cells, but they need lots of it. But then genes that cause cancer, or genes that are thought to cause cancer, they became popular. And now what we know, which is really cool, is you've got the genes that are thought to contribute to cancer, and you've got screwed up metabolism, and they're not separate things. They interact. The genes that are thought to be involved in causing cancer actually are also involved in metabolism. And genes that are involved in metabolism often change how these genes work. So the whole thing is one big mix-up of everybody kind of playing off each other. And that's, I really make a big point to that because I've heard people argue, and vehemently argue, it's metabolic, no, it's genetic, and it's like, no, it's everything. So the obvious question from a therapy point of view is if tumors need lots of glucose, why don't you just drop the glucose in your body and starve the tumor? There is one minor problem with that. Your brain needs a lot of glucose. So if you do nothing but drop all the glucose in your body, you might starve the cancer, but you're also going to starve your brain. And I don't think most people would consider that a positive thing. So there is a way around this, and it's called the therapeutic ketogenic diet, or we call it metabolic therapy. So why do I call it a therapeutic ketogenic diet? When we first started working on this, other than epilepsy, people were really not doing a lot. And one scientist named Dr. Thomas Seyfried, who was working in brain tumors, most of the rest of the world was kind of like, diet? I don't think so. That's like, you know, just like when mom wants to lose a couple of pounds. It's like, no, this is actually a therapy. It is very extreme, it's very regimented, and it actually has a really good basis for why we should look at it as a therapy. It's very, very high fat, which is why you really want to work with somebody who knows what they're doing. It's very low carb and it's low protein. And when I talk about that, okay, so this is what a normal diet would look like. We get about half our calories from carbohydrates, a bunch of fat, protein, and this is obviously average. Different people are different. What I would call sort of the normal ketogenic diet, because the ketogenic diet's gotten really popular nowadays for weight loss and for enhancing sports performance. So the fat goes up and the protein is pretty high, but the carbs still stay low. But when you talk about therapy, you can go as low as this. You can actually end up with your protein and your carbs being a very small percentage of your diet and the vast majority of your calories coming from fats. Do you have to go this extreme? Maybe not, but this is really what we think about when we talk about using it therapeutically. And that's why I say it's sort of like a don't try this at home, folks, kind of thing without a lot of study, a lot of work with a dietitian, things like that. So it reduces the blood sugar, glucose is a sugar in your blood, and it increases something called ketones. Ketones are what your body makes when it metabolizes or uses up fat, and that is normal in our body. This is not something that's abnormal. Our body will normally make ketones when you use the fat in your body or when you eat fat. Well, it turns out ketones are a wonderful, wonderful energy source for your brain. In fact, they're looking at a ketogenic diet now for things like Alzheimer's and other neurodegenerative diseases because your brain is so good on ketones. Just, it loves the stuff. So now you can drop your blood glucose, but still feed your brain and the rest of your normal cells very well. It's been used for many years to treat pediatric epilepsy, and that in kids that don't respond to drugs. Some of these kids have these horrible syndromes where they might have 100 seizures a day, and this helps a percentage of them, a good percentage of them. So that means it's got a long history for safety. It is safe. We and other scientists have found that it inhibits the growth of brain tumors in live animals. That's what in vivo means. So there are mouse models out there. There's case studies in people that have been published in peer-reviewed journals. That means the studies are vetted by other scientists. They've been looked at and approved that all the scientific methods are really good, so they're actually published. And then there's anecdotal studies. Well, we know if it's on Facebook, it's true. So I guess we can just stop the conversation right here, right? All jokes aside, the way I, as a scientist, look at anecdotal studies means you go online or you talk to somebody and they say, it worked, it cured my cancer. Do I automatically believe them? No. Do I automatically disbelieve them? No. If I see enough people thinking there's something to this because they've got personal history, or friends that have had it. To me as a scientist, that suggests that maybe there's something to it and maybe we should study it in a more controlled manner to see what's going on. And that's why I am really a firm believer in the ketogenic diet, basically because of the combination of all of these things, including our data, which has really supported this. And there's lots of publications that suggest it's supported. I mean scientific publications. So this was the first experiment we did that actually changed the entire course of the research in my laboratory. And the references are all down here. All the work I'm showing you is published, and you can easily access it if you want to see the original publications. But this is a growth curve. That means as this line goes up, the tumor cells are growing. So this black line is just the tumor cells just where we didn't really do anything. The blue line is when we added ketones. The cells, they grow in a liquid media, so we added ketones. And you can see that the growth is reduced just by dumping ketones in. The patient from whom these cells came got a drug called BCNU. That was the common drug before temozolomide came out. And you can see that the cells, that's the red line, where's my pointer? Okay. The cells don't grow for a little while and then they kind of start to grow again. And that's pretty normal when you dump chemotherapy on cells that you're growing in the laboratory. But when we added the ketone to the chemotherapeutic, it wiped out the culture. And that was when I said, okay, we should start studying this. And that's when we really started looking in my lab at what was going on. And just to tell you, this is the name of the cell line. It has nothing to do with the patient's initials. It's from the 4th tumor that a young man had back in the 70s. So a colleague of mine started this. It's a very, very aggressive, very strong cell line in the laboratory. We grew it with lots and lots of glucose in the media. This is a high level of glucose in the media. So there's lots of glucose in the food that we gave these cells. So we didn't drop the glucose. We just dumped in ketones. And that's a normal amount of drug. So this told me that the ketones, even without dropping glucose, is doing something important. So a lot of my lab work actually focused on the ketone itself, not necessarily on just dropping glucose. We really focus on the ketones. So what we did, we really had to do this in a mouse model, and because doing it in cells grown in the lab is, there's a lot that goes on in the body when you talk about metabolism. So we brought a mouse model into the lab, and well, we made a mouse model, I should say. And I'm gonna start by saying I am an animal lover. Working on animal models is the last thing that I want to do. So I have to do everything in cells we grow in the lab. And then when there's nothing else that I can do except I have to go to the mouse model, I will. It's done extremely humanely. And for a scientist to use even a single mouse, we have to fill out so much paperwork and get all kinds of things approved that our institutions also ensure that everything is also done very well. So just so everybody knows that. And I use as few mice as possible to get the data that I need. And one of the things we did to ensure this is we actually made these tumor cells glow in the dark. So everybody knows that fireflies will glow. You get this nice little glow. Well, you can actually buy the gene that causes this to happen. So we did. We bought this gene. It's called luciferase. And we tossed it into mouse tumor cells. And now we have mouse cells that glow. And we have a special machine that can actually detect this glow. So the machine actually makes the colors. So the red means there's lots and lots of glow. So you can't see it with your naked eye, but the machine can pick it up. So we have, these are just little colonies of the cells growing. But what's really cool about that is we can surgically implant it in the mouse's brain, and it looks like a little baby operating room. So, so it really is an anesthesia, all that stuff, and you can put it in the brain, and then we can take the mice to the machine and we can literally image them and pick up that glow. And it's very non-invasive. We don't even have to shave their fur. It just picks it up right through the skull, right through everything. And it will tell us exactly how many photons of light there are. So it will actually not just say the tumor's there, but it will say how big is the tumor. So this is what we do. We surgically implant the cells in the animal's brain, and then we do one of those imaging things, and we separate the animals into different treatment groups: ketogenic diet, not diet, with or without radiation. We do check their ketone and glucose levels in the blood. We feed them ketogenic diet. So we feed half the animal's standard mouse diet and half ketogenic diet. We make sure the ketogenic diet is causing what it should cause. And then in this model, the animals first show symptoms about 24 hours before they're going to succumb to the disease. Before that, they seem to be fine. So as soon as we see the symptoms, we humanely sacrifice them. And that allows us to study the tissue. This is what it looks like when you image them. We image them every 3 days. So the animals get a little bit of anesthetic gas, and then they're put in this machine, and it's warm and it's dark, and they just kind of, there's a little nose cone that feeds them the anesthetic gas, and her eyes are open, but it's because mouse don't have eyelids. So she's sleeping very happily. The machine actually makes a picture of the bioluminescence that it sees, and it will give us a number of how bright that is. And when you take the mouse out after this and put it back in its cage, in 5 minutes, she's up and running around and happy. So it's a very humane, nice way that we can actually follow the growth of the tumor. Okay, somebody's talking in the background, but I'm not sure who. Okay.
Yeah, someone needs to mute their microphone or move it away from how close it is.
Okay, so this is what it looks like when you do the study. So every time this line drops, it means 1 or 2 mice have succumbed to the disease. So the faster the line drops, the faster the mice are succumbing to the disease. And this is all published. This is an open access journal. You can go and get the publication. It's easy enough to find. This is actually a combination of 2 separate experiments. So this is the survival of the animals on standard diet. And when they're on ketogenic diet, you can see that the animals are living longer. And it's very significant if you do the statistics. You're getting about a 5-day increase in the median survival here. That might not sound like a lot, but 5 days is a pretty good sized percentage of 23. So clearly, animals on the ketogenic diet are doing better. But I would never, ever suggest that somebody do this without what we call standard of care, which would be chemo, radiation, whatever your physician says. So here we tried it with temozolomide. So we also gave the mice temozolomide with regular diet or temozolomide with a ketogenic diet. We used one called KetoCal, which is actually a human ketogenic diet. You can see that, again, the animals on temozolomide, they did a little better than the animals that got no treatment at all. But the KetoCal made the temozolomide much better. So this is really good. The ketogenic diet is helping the standard work better. But this is what really completely blew our minds. And when we published this, I started to get contacted by cancer patients, which is a very odd feeling for a scientist. But we had a way to give the animals head radiation, so we could radiate them. And you can see that the animals did much better. They survived for 50% of them survived 41 days if they were standard diet plus radiation. But this is what blew our minds. Ketogenic diet plus radiation, 9 out of 11 animals, the tumor disappeared. And the reason I know it disappeared is because we've got a way to actually image these animals. So here's one of the animals that got radiation plus standard diet. And like I said, the machine will give us a quantitation of how much luminescence, how much brightness there is. So you can see that it kind of starts to go up slowly, and then it goes up quickly. And then when the tumor has this much, when it's this big, essentially the animal was sacrificed because of symptoms. But this was one of the animals that got radiation. So you can see there definitely was a tumor there. It's not that we forgot to put the tumor in or something. The tumor was there. It kind of grows for a little while, and then it gets smaller, and then it disappears completely. And at day about 101, it's a weird number because we image about every 3 days, I said, well, let's put the animals back on standard diet. And we did that, and we waited another 200 days, and the tumors didn't come back, any of them. So we got super excited about this, obviously. Now, and so did anybody who saw the publication. Now, does this mean that I think the ketogenic diet is going to cure people? I'll be honest, not necessarily. There's a lot of things that can cure cancer in mice that doesn't cure cancer in people. However, if you can show that it's doing something like this in mice, that tells me, okay, we should really be looking at this for moving it forward in people, because this is really good. And we know that the ketogenic diet is not harmful. It's got a long history of use in epilepsy, so we know it can be done. So this was incredibly exciting. But of course, other scientists want to know, how does it work? Well, what's really cool about it is it's not, sorry, I forgot my clock chimes. I'll wait till it finishes. Okay, so a lot of people studying this focused on the glucose. You're dropping the blood sugar, and that's what's making the difference, because cancer needs sugar. But we did a bunch of studies, and we've got a couple papers out looking at mechanisms, and it's not only what it does to sugar. Even if you don't drop the sugar very much, it does things. In those mice, the sugar didn't drop a whole lot when we tested their blood sugar. It dropped some, but not a lot. And we still saw these really cool effects. So I don't have time to go through all the data, but I can certainly provide you with a list of the references or even send you copies of them. So we found that in these mice, it reduces the swelling around the tumor. This is really good. In people, they give you steroids if you have a lot of swelling. So it reduces swelling. It reduces the formation of new blood vessels. If you guys, tumors make new blood vessels. If you guys have heard of Avastin, which is a therapy that's used in people, the purpose of that is to reduce the formation of new blood vessels. It's to reduce something called angiogenesis. Well, the ketogenic diet also reduced the formation of new blood vessels. It reduced inflammation around the tumor. It increased the anti-tumor immune response. And like I said, all of these we've published, so it's been looked at by other scientists, and they say, yeah, we believe this data. Growth factors are chemicals that tumors can make and then respond to. So tumors can make these factors, and your normal cells make these factors, and it makes cells grow. And your normal cells are supposed to respond to these things only when they're supposed to. By that I mean, if you cut yourself, the cells around the cut are supposed to grow to fill the hole, but then they're supposed to stop growing. So in tumors, some of these signals that say grow are screwed up and they don't stop. Well, one of the things the ketogenic diet does is it helps reduce some of these growth signals. And again, there are pharmaceuticals that are also doing this. It reduces what's called hypoxia. Hypoxia is sort of in the center of the tumor. You very often get a reduction in oxygen because enough blood vessels to feed it. And the cells that are in that region tend to be resistant to radiation and chemotherapy. Well, the ketogenic diet tends to reduce this, and that might be one way that's contributing to how it sensitizes cells to therapy. It also helps reduce the expression of genes that are good for cancer. Now, it does all of these in tumor cells, but it doesn't seem to do a lot of this in normal cells. So it's not like it's going to make your normal cells grow badly. And then it's something called epigenetic modifications. And why am I going to mention that and tell you just a little bit about that? Because when I started working with the ketogenic diet, I could not figure out how any one thing would do all of these things. Honestly, it was too good. It did too many good things, and it was just hard to believe. How could it do all those things? Well, it turns out that there is a way in our cells that the genes can be turned on, turned off, used. When I say turned on and turned off, I kind of mean like a light switch. If you turn a gene on, it's going to do its thing. It's going to, if it's a growth gene, it's going to say grow. If it's a therapy resistance gene, it's going to say be resistant. So there are a lot of ways that our cells can change how those genes are used. We all think of DNA as sort of this, what we call the double helix. It kind of looks like a ladder that somebody twisted. But in fact, our DNA really looks more like this. Don't worry about all the little doofy things on here. Basically, there are these proteins, it looks like these cylinders, and the DNA, which is this line, is wrapped around the protein. So instead of the DNA looking like a twisted ladder, it kind of looks more like pearls on a string, where the string is actually wrapped around the pearls. And so if you think about the DNA this way, and I think in cartoons, so if I was going to try to attack this DNA, it's hard to find a piece of DNA that isn't wrapped around those proteins, those little conical things. On the other hand, if the DNA looks like this, if it's all nice and open, aha, if I'm a radiation molecule or something, okay, there's a piece I can get to. I can damage that. Okay, this is good. Well, our cells have ways to move the DNA from this to this. It goes back and forth. To go this way, it uses something called a hat. And to go this way, it uses something called a HDAC. The words are irrelevant, just the idea that you've got HDACs. There are cancer therapies now that are inhibitors of this. So they want to block this from happening. There are actual therapies that are in clinical trials to block the DNA from going from this to that. Why? Because this is more sensitive to damage. Well, guess what? The ketone, the main ketone that's made from a ketogenic diet, it's called BHB, is one of the things that can block this. So it promotes, or it helps keep the DNA looking more like that. And that's what you want. It's more sensitive to DNA damaging agents, meaning radiation, chemotherapy. Now, the other things that happen when the DNA looks like this versus that is it changes how the genes are used. So what we're finding and what others have found is one of the things that it happens if the DNA looks like this is you're reducing some of the things that can repair the DNA when it's damaged. Well, radiation damages DNA. That's what you want. Chemotherapy damages DNA. That's what you want. Your normal cells can repair the damage. Your normal cells don't have this response to BHB. So your normal cells are going to be fine. But the cancer cells, you want to not be able to repair. And we think that ketones are helping to inhibit or stop the repair of DNA that's damaged by therapy. So that's one of the ways that we think this is working. And also, there are so many other genes that are involved in that whole big list that I gave you. And we think that it's this epigenetics that's changing the expression of lots and lots of genes. So essentially, the ketogenic diet is not just a one punch, it's really multiple punches. And it's really, in our opinion, potentially helping a lot of other things work. So there are clinical trials for the ketogenic diet in cancer. The last time I looked, there are about 25 of them. Most of them are in brain tumors, but there are other cancers that are being looked at. There's also some studies that are not only showing the use of ketogenic diet with what happens to the tumor growth, but also what happens to the person, the quality of life. We've had people that have come to us and said, you know, my brain is clearer, it's sharper. I don't have that fogginess. I have more energy to do things. So I think there's a lot that goes into this over and above just what it does to the tumor, which is obviously important. So the take-home message of all this stuff, not only from this quick overview I gave you, but from the data we have, and honestly, because there's a lot of people that have spoken to us about their experiences and things, and other physicians doing this. I go and I present at meetings, or I attend meetings, and people who are using this, other physicians that are using this, we'll chat about things. So this is sort of my take on a take-home message. Okay. We're going to call it nutritional ketosis. You can call it a ketogenic diet, therapeutic ketogenic diet. Basically making ketones in your body, okay, does a lot of things. I love that word, pluripotent. It means many things. It just has a great sound to it, okay? So it has a lot of anti-tumor effects. Is each of the effects individually as good as some of the drugs out there? Frankly, no. However, the drugs that do the same thing will often have a side effect or side effects. And the ketogenic diet really doesn't have much in the way of side effects. So my personal bias is if you use the two together, you might even be able to reduce the level of the actual drug, reduce the side effects, but still get the same effect because the ketogenic diet is adding to the effect. So that's my personal take on it. We already know it's safe. There's lots of information about that from years and years of epilepsy and the people I know that have been using it for cancer. It is safe. It increases how effective the standard therapies are. We've shown that in the laboratory. There are reports, clinical reports and physicians that say, yes, it looks like it's making things work better. It's got lots of mechanisms of action. It does lots of things. To me, that suggests that it's going to help make a lot of different therapies work better. So I'd like to see it used with a lot of different therapies in actual clinical trials. The biggest problem we have with clinical trials, and we had one when I worked at the Barrow Neurological Institute. I now work at Phoenix Children's Hospital. I'm doing the same work, only I'm focusing on children's brain tumors. The biggest problem we had was compliance. It is not easy for people to comply to it. And I think that's because years ago, there really weren't a lot of supportive things out there. Now you can actually buy coconut oil easily. You can buy ketogenic food easily, well, relatively easily. You can buy avocado mayonnaise, Bratton's favorite. So there's a lot out there now that makes it a little bit easier. And if people work with a good dietitian, it's not as really difficult as it was, say, 7 years ago. I'd like to see more studies done. I think it obviously helps. Does it help everybody? Probably not. Does it help some people? Definitely. Does it help most people? That remains to be seen. But there's enough there that we really need more studies. And I think it's people like Bratton are living proof, and I know some other people here that actually did so well that they started the neurosurgeons at the BNI to want to start using this also. There's enough out there that says, yeah, there's really, really something to this. This is definitely worth doing. It's definitely worth studying. Obviously, I don't do this alone. These were fresh-faced high school kids in my lab working. He is now a college grad working in my lab. This was my PhD student. He is now a PhD down in South Carolina with 2 kids. So these are people in my lab that have done the work. Nobody does this alone. I've had lots of scientific collaborators. I'm extremely fortunate in the wonderful people I've been able to work with, including Dr. Nel Syed, who actually is in the UK. So we have a really nice international collaboration. You can't do anything without funding. I've been, again, very fortunate to have foundations and things that have been interested in helping us work on this. If anybody wants to give a tax-deductible donation, there is no donation that's too small. We use it directly for the research. I can tell you how to do that if anybody wants to. And with that, I'm very happy to take any questions and open this up to sort of more of a conversation. Go for it, guys.
Thank you for the presentation. I thought it was extremely informative, and I like the statistics and the diagrams that you threw up. That really kind of drives the point home in terms of like longevity potential. Obviously, there's no guarantees, but definitely refreshing. I myself have struggled with trying to figure out the balance between an alkaline diet and a keto diet. So again, very informative. So yeah, I just wanted to thank you for that piece of it. One of the things that I've noticed that a lot of commentary has been shared about surrounding keto is a byproduct is weight loss. I myself haven't want to go in the opposite direction. So I probably need to dial that into the nutrition or the dietitian a little bit more, but just some feedback from my point of view.
Well, one thing I can respond to is I've gained 5 pounds on it, almost 7 pounds. But I was a 148-pound marathon runner, and I weighed in today, and I'm 155 pounds. But I put on probably 5 to 10 pounds of muscle on it. And so, and you know, Adrienne is saying, I mean, I can do 50 push-ups now. So I think my theory is if you can work out on it, you're not going to lose weight. And you talk your diet, but I have 2 dietitians. I have a lot of help. So, and one that Adrienne got.
That's important, but you're so successful.
Yeah, so if you're working out and you're not on the sofa all the time, I don't think you'll lose weight, particularly if you're already lean. So that's a thought. Again, I've gone from 149 to 155, and everybody was worried I'd lose weight. And I ran 5.5 miles today, so it's not like I'm, you would think I'd lose, but I'm not. So that's just a anecdotal. What's that?
Yeah, I'm gonna add something to that. So the first person that went on this, it's a kind of an interesting story. I got this contact from this person, local person, who young woman, young mother, got a diagnosis of a brain tumor out of the blue, total surprise. And it turned, and she and her husband, very smart, they went online, they started looking at things, and they found me. And she and I actually had worked on a project together for children at the Arizona Science Center. So we knew each other. So she decided she really wanted to do the ketogenic diet, and she held very, very strictly to it, did very well, is still doing very, very well. And she worked with Lee, the dietitian that Bratton's been working with. And at first she lost some weight. And she actually had 2 tumor surgeries, and close together. At first, she lost some weight, and she didn't have any weight to lose either. And there was a little concern, and then people started thinking, wait a minute. She used to be very active physically, used to, do a lot of workout type things with her family. And now she's had 2 brain tumor surgeries in the course of a few weeks, and she stopped working out. And I'll bet that lost is muscle. And sure enough, when she started feeling better and working out again, that weight came back. Now, the thing that people say, though, is that people are using keto for weight loss if they're overweight, and that's true. But if you're already thin, your dietitian can easily, and this is what Lee did for this woman I told you about. Your dietitian can alter the number of calories to ensure that you don't lose weight. If you need to lose weight, great, then it can be tweaked so you lose some weight, but it doesn't have to. And that's really where working with a good dietitian is absolutely critical. The other thing about weight loss and cancer in general, it's not much of an issue with brain tumor patients, but with other patients, because I'm sure you guys see people with other kinds of cancers. I know I certainly am contacted by people with other kinds of cancers. Oncologists are terrified of weight loss in their cancer patients because there is something called cachexia, which means muscle wasting. And when cancer patients lose weight, it can be muscle wasting, and that's a really, really bad thing. But there are studies, there are publications, when a patient or an animal is on a ketogenic diet, if they lose weight, they are not losing muscle mass, they are losing fat. So it's a different kind of weight loss. It's a healthy weight loss. So bottom line, if a person needs to lose weight, which by the way will help them if they have cancer, the ketogenic diet is tweaked for it to be a healthy weight loss. If they don't have weight to lose, the dietitian or nutritionist should be tweaking it to prevent the weight loss. But Bratton is totally correct. You can actually not lose muscle mass, and if anything, maybe even build muscle mass on this. So when you talk about losing weight, you have to think about, are we talking muscle? Are we talking fat? And what do I want to do? So talk to your dietitian, because she or he should definitely be able to help that.
Thank you.
Oh, Adrienne, can I just ask you to end your slideshow so we can go full screen?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's
I'm
okay.
sorry. Sure.
No worries.
I can see you, and I can see a little bit of me, but I didn't know. So is this?
Thank you. And screen sharing, right? Let's see.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. Let's see. Is it okay? Stop share? There it is.
There
Okay, there. Sorry. Thank you for reminding me. I wasn't exactly sure. I saw me on the screen, so I wasn't sure what you guys were seeing. Okay. Here we go. So more questions, comments.
I think the thing I can't stress enough, I have two nutritionists. I have Lee and Vivian here, and Vivian got me in touch with you, Adrienne. I don't know if you remember that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
I remember you. I don't know if I remember Vivian because I met you.
Yeah, but it's something that if you take, and you really need to monitor yourself, I think is important.
Yes.
And that's one thing that Lee required is, I monitor my ketones and my glucose every day. And a lot of people do it and they do way too much animal. I do, I might eat 3 or 4 ounces of animal protein a day, and that would be a big day for me. So, and almost all my fat is plant-based. So I know other people might do differently, but I do avocado oil, coconut, all those oils. And I feel good, but I can tell you, if I don't work out for a couple of days, I think you have to be careful. I think it's important you walk or lift or do whatever. If you're bedridden, I think this diet might be hard.
Now, well, that's also just the idea of exercise in general for cancer patients, especially because a lot of the therapies make people very tired. But there have been a lot of publications and a lot of physicians that kind of agree with this just from their personal experience with patients, that some sort of movement or exercise, whatever the person can do, is going to be helpful. Irrespective of a ketogenic diet, some kind of movement is going to be helpful. And we've got one young guy here, he's actually a teenager, just graduated high school, but he had a brain tumor diagnosis and had a couple of surgeries and had a stroke from one of the surgeries, but he's doing really well. He's actually volunteering as a student scientist in a lab that's right across the street from us. But he said when he was on the ketogenic diet, he was able to get off the sofa. He was able to start moving again. He was able to start to get a little bit more of that mobility that he wanted, even when he was being treated. So I think that's a side effect kind of being in ketosis. And the point you make about testing your blood cannot be stressed enough. One of the things people do is they say, well, I'm doing it, but they never test their blood, so they don't know if they're doing it. And the reason I say that is because if 5 people eat exactly the same thing and do exactly the same thing with exercise, they will have different levels of blood glucose and blood ketones. Everybody is different. In fact, it's a little easier for men to get their ketones up than women. Does that mean that men do better? No, it doesn't, because everything you do has to be on the background of what you are genetically and what your tumor is genetically. So Bratton, you've done a phenomenal job learning your body. You know when you feel good. You know when you don't feel good. You know what numbers are good for you. Most of the people I know that have been super successful with this, they've done the same thing. Now, some people, you can test your ketones with a urine strip. It's not all that accurate, but it will tell you if you're making ketones. There are 2 meters out there that will test blood and glucose. That will test your blood for glucose and ketones. One of them is called Abbott Precision Extra. The little strips you need for that are kind of expensive. There's another company out there that does a wonderful job, and they're very positive about helping and being involved in the whole keto for cancer stuff, called Keto Mojo, Ketomojo. You can get them on Amazon, and their strips are less expensive. So if you really want to do this, test your blood and figure out how do you feel when your numbers are at a certain level, and what does your blood glucose and blood ketones look like when you've had a big meal, a small meal, avocado mayonnaise, coconut oil, a piece of wedding cake. You know, try to learn your body just a little bit, because that'll really help you get this to work optimally. And I think with the alkaline diet plus keto diet, again, talk to a dietitian. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think it's more just a matter of a good dietitian can actually tweak that diet for you specifically. Whether you're vegetarian, eat a lot of meat, eat a lot of fish, want to stay alkaline, the good ones that really know what they're doing, they will tweak that diet for you and with you. And that's really important.
Yeah, and I would argue I'm doing pretty close to both. I mean, most of the keto stuff I have are pretty, low acid and high alkaline. And I was just going to do this. This is my, can y'all see that? That's my monitor and my keto strips.
It's not showing on my screen. Is it showing on everybody else's?
Oh, can you,
yep,
now that I'm talking, can you see it?
I can see it.
And if you order it on Amazon, the strips are about $1 a piece. So,
okay.
I figure,
is it the Abbott meter?
Yeah, I have the Abbott meter.
Yeah, is that okay? Yeah, and Keto Mojo, which is right. That's the first one. Keto Mojo didn't exist when we first got those, and that's what we used with the animal studies. And that's actually I've got one here. But Keto Mojo is the sort of the newer kid on the block, but they've been around a while, and they're actually a little less expensive. So you can kind of check into those too if you don't have a meter already. If you have the Abbott, it's great. But either one of those will do very well. I don't know why, Bratton, but you're, oh, wait a minute. Now I know why. Yep, you're back. We have more people that joined us, so I have a little arrow to see everybody. Okay, you're back. So other questions, comments, does it make sense? Do you have any questions about that? Was there anything I said that was unclear? I know there were some big words in there that, and I'm not saying that to be condescending. If I was listening to the talk by a lawyer, there'd be big words that I wouldn't understand, or an economist. So it's definitely not condescending. It's all where your background is.
Yeah, actually, I thought the way you used the big word and then explained it was perfect. So I learned at least 2 new words.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So, yeah. Have there been clinical trials, or is this, Bratton? Were you on a trial that's specific?
Well, I didn't know exactly what, but I got all this stuff on what they were doing, and I guess it wasn't a trial, was it? I mean, but I got all these things that they're doing, and Vivian got me, and Adrienne and Lee agreed to take me on because we were doing this on our own, and we said, well, and Adrienne answered our call. So, and we found out what she was doing, and she called us.
I answer all calls.
What's that? Well,
I said I answer all calls. I think it's important.
We're a group from South Carolina, and Vivian's been my best friend for years, and you guys I was an elite runner. So, for me, this is just another thing to do. But do remember, I was, 140 something pound guy. And I passed out at the end of the Boston Marathon was my first signs of this.
Wow.
And,
yeah.
And my doctor does tell me, he says, what I do, he wouldn't recommend for anybody other than me, because I worked out all through my radiation and did the chemo diet. I would do the bicycle. And, I don't see well enough to drive, but I ride my bike to the grocery store. People are, when my neighbors catch me riding my bike to the grocery store, they insist on taking me. My neighbors go, Bratton, what are you doing today? You're not
good neighbors.
So,
yeah.
And I think you should live. I don't drive because I don't want to hurt anybody else. But, one thing that did happen to me is I ran into a tree last week because my vision, and I was running on a trail talking to people, and boom, I was like George of the Jungle. So there's still ups and downs, but I think that, and again, I found out about this by seeing one of these things on the internet, and I know you were doing studies, and I didn't know if I was in the study or not, but y'all treat me like I am because you give me input, and I guess you're at least getting anecdotal as an evidence from me, right?
Yeah, and we're getting good data. It's numbers. It's real, and you're interacting with Lee and interacting with your nutritionist. So the problem with the actual clinical trials, well, first of all, clinical trials are unbelievably expensive. To do the same thing that you're doing, if it becomes a clinical trial, it adds a huge amount of money through the hospital. It blew my mind when we set up the clinical trial that we tried to have at the BNI, how much money gets added to it that you wouldn't necessarily need. So the clinical trial that we tried to do at the BNI, I actually got a foundation to donate meters and strips for patients and donate KetoCal to anybody who wanted to use it. And we still had compliance issues. And the compliance issues included getting people to actually test their blood and give the information. So we didn't know if they were really in ketosis or not for some of them, for a lot of them. We had trouble getting some of them to contact the dietitian. So if they were having a problem, they would go ask Aunt Jane, well, what's a ketogenic meal? You did Atkins. Well, it's not the same. You can't do it that way. Clinical trial, you've got to use diet as if it was a drug. You've got to absolutely follow what you're supposed to do. You've got to contact the dietitian. You've got to do the testing. Exactly what you're doing, Bratton. Exactly what you're doing. So, and this is a common thing when I've spoken to other people with clinical trials. It's fairly common that it's more difficult to get people to be really compliant and to get the data that you need as a scientist or as a clinician to figure out if the person is actually in ketosis. Like I said, different people eating the same thing is not going to give the same numbers. So that's kind of been the biggest problem with the clinical trials, is getting appropriate compliance. It's a lot easier to get somebody to take a pill once a day and to be compliant with that. And people say it's just food. I'll put that in quotes, just food. When you're using food as a therapy in this way, it is not just food. So this is the issue with this kind of thing in a clinical trial. We're trying to collect data to the extent we can from people who have done this so that we can kind of publish what we call case studies, like a case reports where we put people together like Bratton, who's done a beautiful job just keeping track of everything. That other woman I told you about, she's done a beautiful job keeping track of everything. And she's, like I said, still doing incredibly well. and still, so she's not necessarily super heavy keto. She's definitely low glycemic. So she's kind of keeping with it to a large extent years later. So that's the kind of thing we're trying to collect. I know the Europeans are doing some studies, and they're trying to do it like where they provide food so that they can try to keep things a little bit more constrained. So it's hard to say that there are clinical trials that say, yes, it's definitely happening. But what is interesting is how many physicians are now really interested in this, want their patients doing it. It's definitely not the majority. There are still lots of clinicians that either say, eat whatever you want, or they say, eat healthy, whatever that means, or they say, it won't matter. there are more and more clinicians that are starting to look at this, starting to see patients doing it and saying, hey, wait a minute, this is making a difference. And I think that's what's really cool.
And Adrienne, and I'm going to show this. Is it okay for me to share this with other people? Here's my data model that I keep up with, so you can see that I have my glucose, ketones. I don't know if y'all can see that, but that's I keep up with it. Other than when I'm in an airplane, but 99% of the days I've kept up with it, and I consider under 1.5 to be in compliance. So.
Well, he says 1.5 is a ratio of your ketones to your glucose. That's
so. You take your glucose divided by 18 to put it on the same metric scale, I guess, as your ketones. But if you're, like for example, the day I was exactly, but 1-to-1 supposedly perfect. But I don't know if you can see this, but some days I'll be at 0.67 or 0.62. And my average last month was 1.14. So, and my average ketones were 4.43. So, I mean, I keep up
which
with
is
all
high. I mean, it's not super high, but it's good. Yeah.
Yeah. So
it's
and again, I've shared with people the the avocado mayonnaise. Ever since I've been eating that, I'm almost every day I eat it, I'm in ketosis. But that may not be the same for everybody. But that's
exactly.
kind of my superfood, as crazy as it sounds.
It's not crazy at all. Avocados and mayonnaise individually are really good sources of fat. So the other thing that I'm going to make a comment on, even though nobody asked about it, is there are what's called exogenous ketones. What that means is ketones you drink, okay? And I've actually given talks for one of the companies that makes these things, even though I told them right up front, I'm not going to talk about your product because I have no studies done on that. There is a scientist, Dr. Angela Poff, works with Dr. Dom D'Agostino, who've been doing a lot with these types of things for various diseases, including cancer. So people have asked me, well, what about just drinking this stuff? Frankly, to me, it tastes like artificially flavored Kool-Aid. If you like diet soda, you won't mind these things. They come in a lot of different flavors. If you don't like diet soda, like me, I can't stand the taste of that stuff. The artificial sweetener might put you off just a little bit. But they're out there and they're easily available. They're not cheap, but they're readily available. The thing with exogenous ketones or ketones that you drink is it will raise your ketone level. It will even probably drop your glucose level a little bit. But when you drink them like that, your levels will go up for a short period of time and then they'll come back down. The thing about a ketogenic diet is you tend to be level. Okay, so yes, your ketones and glucose will go up and down, but it won't go up and down quite as much as it would if the only source of ketones you have is the stuff you drink. So do I think they might be helpful? Sure, they might. Certainly wouldn't hurt, let me put it that way. But to do that instead of the full ketogenic diet, I think you're really going to be losing a lot of the bang for the buck that you get with a ketogenic diet if you only drink that stuff. If you can't do the ketogenic diet for some reason, if you find it impossible, if you absolutely have to have some, corn on the cob or something, it's better than nothing. But again, I think the full diet is going to give you more bang for the buck. And by the way, for those of you who can't do without wine, there is ketogenic wine. There are companies that are now making keto certified. Everybody I know who knows ketogenic diet says, yes, you can drink these wines. There's a company, Dry Farms wine. And they're at all the keto meet out samples. So you don't have to go without your wine if you happen to be a wine. I'm not, but I've had people come to me and say, I would do this, but I can't do without my wine. It's like, well, you don't have to. So.
The only thing I'll say about that is Vimpat. If you're on Vimpat, that you can't have wine if you're on Vimpat, or it'll counteract.
Okay.
You have to be on Keppra, and Keppra didn't.
Okay, and those are things I don't know.
Yeah. So I'm just asking, if you're on
those are
Keppra,
things
you can drink the wine. If you're on Vimpat, you can't.
Okay.
I don't know how many people are on here are still on seizure meds, but that's the only meds I'm on now is Vimpat twice a day.
Okay, I think we are run out of time, but thank you so much, Adrienne. This was amazing. I learned so much.
My pleasure.
It was truly fascinating.
Good.
And just one more plug for the OurBrainBank app, because if we get everyone who's doing this, like you, Bratton, using the app, doing the ketogenic diet. And we'll be able to show that, we'll be able to use that, make our own clinical trial, not clinical obviously, but our own case studies. Okay.
Yeah,
well,
That would be fantastic. And
Yeah.
if you did that and you wanted to try to get it published, I would do everything I could to help you get that published as an author, because obviously we publish in scientific journals. Because one of the things that I think the ketogenic diet not only is going to, for many people, and I won't say for all because I'm too honest, I don't think anything is going to work for everybody, but I think it's going to help a lot of people not only live longer, but I think the quality of life issues really do improve from everybody I've spoken to. If they can stay on it, if they figure out a way to stay on it that is not really disturbing to their lifestyle, and I think that's doable for many people, they feel better. And I think that's a really important, is how you feel.
Great. Okay. Okay, thank you everyone for coming, and this was amazing, and we've recorded it, so we're going to, we'll post it on our Facebook group, and just if you want to,
Thank you. Okay.
the link, just email Martha at OurBrainBank, send you a link. Okay, thank you very much. Bye.
Good to see you.
Thank you so much. Nice talking to everybody.